Welcome to this special edition of Global Perspectives. Last week on the show we talked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the impending crisis between Israel and Iran. Tonight we bring you another perspective from someone who has a special insight into Israeli politics. Ambassador Alon Ushpiz is currently the Israeli ambassador to India and Sri Lanka. His former roles also include serving as the policy advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu and Shimon Peres when they were foreign ministers. And he has also served in Washington, D.C. and considers U.S.-Israeli relations a hobby even more so than a career responsibility. On his recent visit to Colombo, Ambassador Ushpiz sat down with Global Perspectives and talked, sometimes candidly and sometimes diplomatically, about a host of issues, including West Bank settlements, UN resolutions, U.S.-Israeli relations, and Iran.
Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem have always been a sticking point in any peace negotiation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Israel's most recent decision to legalize 3 outposts indicates a change in policy from 2009, when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu promised not to further settlement activity.
I want to go back to a speech of Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2009, in which he said, in the context of talking about its Palestinian issue, till a permanent agreement is brought up, we have no intention to build new settlements or set aside land for new settlements. This is what he said in 2009, I believe March or so. What caused this policy to change by 2012?
No, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and I think it's symbolic that we're having this interview the same day that we're going to have the reception celebrating 64 years of Israeli independence here in Colombo. It's a wonderful question that you raise, and I think that it's also very symbolic that one of the most amazing things for me when I think about our people, my people, is that for the last 64 years of independence we haven't relinquished our strong desire and persistent quest for peace for even one day. Now, what lies at the heart of this question of settlement is one of the biggest myths of the peace process between Israelis and Palestinians, which is that you have, unfortunately, people who believe that the settlements is the core issues and one of the main obstacles to peace, which is not the case. It is not the case because I can give you and our viewers at least 2 examples, very solid ones, in which Israel made dramatic changes in its policy, and nevertheless our partners, the Palestinians, the other side for these negotiations, have not seized upon the opportunity and enabled both of us to push forward and achieve peace. The first example is our disengagement from Gaza, in which we evacuate thousands of people, uprooted whole communities, including synagogues and graveyards. And nevertheless, the barter, or what we got in return, was a barrage of thousands of rockets from Gaza to our southern cities in Israel. The second example is exactly this thing that you're raising, which is a period of 10 months in which the government of Israel has done an unprecedented thing in our history and said, for the sake of peace, for the sake of resuming negotiations between us and the Palestinians, we're going to do nothing on settlements.
So are you saying that Israel will continue to establish more new settlements because they don't believe that the Palestinians will really come to the negotiating table if they stop?
No, that's totally not the point of the policy. The policy of the government of Israel is to find a way as quickly as possible, promptly, swiftly, and sit together with our partners to the negotiating table. We strongly believe, and I was personally involved in peace negotiations for the last more than a decade. We strongly believe that the only way to reach a peaceful accord between us and our neighbors, our partners, is to sit together in the same room and discuss things together. We obviously would be more than willing to discuss all issues, including settlements.
With no preconditions?
With no preconditions. That's quite clear.
As I mentioned to you earlier, we spoke with the journalist from Israel, from the Haaretz newspaper, a prominent newspaper in Israel, and he described, I asked him the same question, he described this position of the government as a paradox. And he said they're blaming Palestinians, as you have indicated that they have not come into the negotiating table, but they're not accepting any responsibility on their part as the establishment of these settlements being somewhat of a barrier, maybe not the most important, as you said, but somewhat of a barrier for starting negotiations, and they're not taking any responsibility. What are your comments for that? This is an Israeli journalist saying...
To begin with, the amount of respect and admiration I have to your colleagues in Israel is unmeasurable. I mean, these people are some of them are one of the most brightest and the cleverest people I've ever met. But once again, our policy at the end of the day is almost a one-item agenda, which is to provide peace and security to Israelis. We are very much concentrated also on the aspirations and the daily life conditions of our neighbors. This is not something we turn a blind eye to. It's not about contradictions. It's about choosing the best and quickest and promptest and most effective way to go into the room and close a deal. We have proven time after time that we are willing to sacrifice the utmost. Also, by the way, in the Sinai Peninsula or in the peace accords between us and the Egyptians, we have uprooted thousands of people. We need to solve these difficulties face to face. There is no point in going around this, and I don't think that if the other side the Palestinians will insist and persist with preconditions, it will bring us anywhere which is good to both sides.
Do you think a different leadership on the Palestinian side would help move this process along?
It's a good question. I strongly believe in the fact that we don't have to choose their leaders. I also strongly believe in the fact that at the end of the day, leadership has a responsibility towards its own people, and if you keep educating your people by all kinds of methods, whether it is governmental TV or public school systems, and the backbone of the education system is incitement and hate, which is unfortunately the case in many instances that we've been seeing in the last couple of years. It won't bring us anywhere good. I think that leadership should keep on hammering in the message that this is going to be solved only by peaceful means. Hatred, incitement, violence, terrorism is not going to bring us anywhere good. It's only going to inflict damage on the people itself. You can take, for example, what we've been seeing in Gaza for the last couple of years since this bloody coup against the Palestinian Authority by the Hamas terrorist organization. The daily life of the people of Gaza, in comparison to our partners in the West Bank, are much worse. I don't think that this should be what they go through, these human beings, what they go through on a daily basis.
Last month, one of the architects of the Oslo Accords, Yossi Beilin, in an open letter to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, suggested that he dissolve the Palestinian Authority and hold Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responsible for the fate of millions of Palestinians. Meanwhile, Netanyahu, in a recent CNN interview, said that he is not interested in governing Palestinians and supports a contiguous Palestinian state.
Speaking for the other side, if you will, one of the greatest accusations is obviously the occupation, and people say that that's a very huge human rights violation on the part of Israel. What are your comments about that, perhaps as an individual, as a diplomat?
You see, this is something that was not born in 48 or in 67, because there was a reality before the establishment of the State of Israel. You had millions of people, Palestinians, ruled by other Arab governments before, certainly before 67. People in the Gaza Strip were governed by Egypt. People in what is called now the West Bank were governed by the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And I have to tell you that I was never very much impressed with the efforts of this government to bring about self-determination to the Palestinian people in this period between 48 and 67. Even more than this, I have my doubts if you compare what we're doing nowadays in order to alleviate suffering, which is something I always would like to look at from not only from an ambassadorial point of view. I think it's our obligation to look at it from a human being's point of view. So if you compare what was done to alleviate the suffering of these people between 48 and 67 by these governments or by the Arab world, and what we've been doing between 67 and 2012, once again, I feel very proud to be an Israeli. This issue has to be solved through political negotiations. There's no bypasses. This is not going to be solved in a fancy, shiny hall in New York or even in Geneva. We have to sit together, whether it is in Ramallah or in Jerusalem. They have their political aspirations. They have to understand that there are a couple of indispensable ingredients, and the first one for us is them recognizing our sovereign right to be an independent Jewish state. And the second one obviously is the issue of security, because once again, I went through these years of the second Intifada in Israel. This is not something that Israeli society is going to sit idly and go through once again. This slaughtering house is not going to repeat itself. So with all the respect that I have to the political aspirations of the other side, this is not going to be solved in any other means but direct negotiations.
So there are some preconditions to talks. Recognition of Israel, stopping violence.
We can speak about everything, but there is no precondition to the fact that we have to go into the room. A Palestinian delegation, no preconditions at all, zero, nada.
So even if they don't recognize Israel, you're still willing to sit with them?
There is a very fundamental paper between us and our Palestinian partners, the PLO back then, before even the establishment of the Palestinian Authority. In this paper, they, among other things, recognize Israel. They denounce terrorism.
So you're waiting for Hamas to come on board?
No, I'm saying the Palestinian Authority. We are not waiting for Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization unless they change their DNA. And there are specific conditions put, not by us, put by the international community, put by the quartet. Very written, publicly declared. This is not an Israeli thing. This is an international community thing. We are waiting for the minute. We are anxiously waiting for the minute the Palestinian Authority will once again reach the decision and go into a room without precondition. I say it in the clearest terms possible. No preconditions. Go into the room and start speaking with us directly. Obviously, we will have our positions, and they will have our positions. But the minute we sit with each other, we can discuss these things.
Similar to Sri Lanka, Israel also faced a diplomatic crisis at the March meeting of the UN Human Rights Council, when the Council decided to create a panel to investigate Israeli settlements. Israel boycotted the proceedings in protest. After the resolutions were passed, the reactions from the Israeli government were harsh, with Prime Minister Netanyahu calling the Council hypocritical and saying it should be ashamed of itself.